As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from his birth. And Jesus' disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Well, to give these opening verses for our gospel text for this Sunday some contemporaneity, you can almost see the disciples in freshly pressed white lab jackets. Perhaps picture them like a group of huddled young interns, making rotations through the hospital rooms of life, supervised by the great attending physician, by Jesus himself. And like all young interns or residents, the disciples were zealous to find the answers to the why of suffering, whether the reason as to why this young man had been born blind, or much like in our own day, are asking the why or how questions of the coronavirus that has hit the world like a veritable tsunami. That dark piece of the jigsaw puzzle of our lives that we're never quite able to fit into place. Now, the disciples had done their homework. They'd been studying their DSM-5s and other diagnostic manuals, and they were well aware of the arguments that concerned the causal connections between sin and suffering. For such causality was more or less assumed in Jesus' day, and we must admit, to a significant degree, still operates in our own time. So let's look at a couple of classic Old Testament texts as examples of such kind of thinking, commonly referred to among biblical scholars as the retribution dogma. From the very beginning of Israel's formative years, consider the first of the commandments recorded in the book of Exodus. As Moses transcribes to the people of Israel from God, from Sinai, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. I am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers and mothers upon the children of the third and fourth generations of those who sin against me." Or again, for example, another case study, we might look at the book of Job, where Job says, "As I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same by the breath of God." So note here that the Exodus text makes a causal connection of sin and suffering between parents and their descendants. It's more communal. Whereas in the Job text, the connection is more on a personal basis between that individual and God. And so, if you're thinking about this carefully, we see here why the disciples consider themselves being quite thorough when they ask their two-part question of Jesus: is it because of this man's sin or his parents that he was born blind? They were following out an underlying logic that went something like this: if you suffer, or if you experience evil in your life, you ought to consider or infer that you've done something sinful for which God is punishing you. But now, watch how Jesus, the light of the world, shines God's healing presence into all the darkness that is here in this picture. Look especially at verse 3. "And Jesus answered them, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him." And so at creation, boom, bazinga, of Leonard and Sheldon, of this sense of our chronic in the dark thinking. There's this big bang. Rather than seeing this poor man as an opportunity for discussion, Jesus is giving us eyes to see the blind man as a child of God who needs healing. This man's tragic blindness at birth happened in such a way, teaches Jesus, so that in his healing, God's grace and mercy can in a dramatic way be spread throughout the world. Yes, through us as Christ's ongoing light in the world. Jesus says, "We must work the works of our Heavenly Father who sent me while it is day." Finally, consider the biblical basis for the closing of our baptismal liturgy. As Jesus says, "Let your light so shine before others that they may see your good works and give glory to our Father who is in heaven." Dear family and friends of First Lutheran Church, in the midst of this Lenten season, walking together through the various valleys of the shadow, yes, especially in the wake of the coronavirus that plagues our community of Sioux Falls, as well as our nation and God's world, it is here that we find God in Jesus, pointing us once again to the light that breaks the darkness in the shadow of his cross. That is God bringing life even out of death, light even out of darkness, and yes, even meaning out of meaninglessness. For the world in all of its blindness still looks at Jesus on the cross, along with the Pharisees of every age, to him who is without sin, and still persists with a dark and sin-filled questioning, who sinned here, this man or his parents, that he should be crucified? But God is even more persistent in answering with a resurrecting hope. It was not that this man, this my beloved Son, ever sinned, no, but rather that my love for you might be made manifest through him. And so we, like the young man, once blind, but who now see, are called to witness to the world. Would you like to become his disciples too? I'll see you, or perhaps better yet, you'll see me this Sunday on our Kello broadcast at 8 o'clock, our telecast on KSFY at 11, or the YouTube posting that will be on our First Lutheran website. And now may God, who is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble, grant you his grace and peace in these defining times of faith.